folks. I'm Alan Watt, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 14th of June, 2020. You know, like vision. You wonder, though, if you have any vision left with the way things are going, but it's not your fault, because you're going through an amazing, planned change of a system worldwide. And we have been for quite a long time, in fact. Remember when we heard all those talks from Bush Senior about his wonderful New World Order coming into view and all that kind of stuff. And then his son, about 10 years later, when he was president, gave a similar speech about the New World Order. And even before that, you had speeches around the same time as the first one, actually. Gorbachev gave talks about the world order as they blended the systems together and got rid of the Cold War at that time, which of course they're resurrecting now because it's just too lucrative for the big military-industrial complex. But there are also about New World Orders. You see, Kissinger, in his last talk about April or so, talked about the New World Order again, a new New World Order. And lots of new normals all the time and new world orders and things like that. And you've been going through it, of course, for quite some time. A lot of it was before even this COVID thing came along. And I've been talking about it for years, coming for years and years and years. Back in the 90s, I talked about the schooling of children and what was intended to do in modern schooling. And it really was blatant social engineering. And I went through the techniques of where they use music to drive home ideas too with each upcoming generation, and adapt it little by little for each generation's group. If you're stuck, say you're born in the 1999 or something like that, and really 2001 came along and the big change happened then. But before then too, you had the social engineering in school, where they were teaching you what Norman Dodd talks about in the Rees Commission was the amalgamation of a Sovietized system or socialized system. Remember, the Soviet system, as Khrushchev said, and Lenin did too, and Stalin especially liked to quip about it, that communism was socialism in a hurry. Socialism is an in-between step to communism or collectivism, run by experts. That's what it's about. And they've been training the children for years and years into this. And then again, through their entertainment, that takes over even when they're out of school or high school or college and so on. And you get updated through movies and lots and lots of talk shows that are on mainstream television and have been on for about 20, 30 years probably. You have no idea of the incredible effectiveness or efficacy, I should say, of psychological conditioning through persuasion and creating consent, you know. The stuff that Bernays talked about and others really upped it since his day, with behavioral experts really studying and studying us all minutely. There's nothing they don't know about us and how to make us change this and change that and do. Look at the farce of the COVID idea. I've got some of that to touch on tonight, and a few other things too to touch on tonight. But what's happening with the COVID idea is part of the revolution, and that didn't work for overpopulation. You see, there's too many of you folks there, you see, and I've given so many talks about that too. You've watched all kind of new definitions of men and women, all that kind of stuff, and even having children or family, etc. And then total indoctrination in children that families are bad now because they consume things, and the world can't afford to have all these things consumed because the elite who rule it are really upset. They want their progeny down in the future to have all those things for themselves. And if you're having it all now, they won't have that for their progeny, you see. So for your own good, they want to eliminate you. You understand? You got to see it from their point of view. And that's what we're going through. It's completely scientifically organized and arranged through the SAGE organization and all the other organizations that work with governments, like in Britain. They're more open, well, a little bit more open with their COBRA for terrorism. But they also admit the SAGE and the group, the subgroup of SAGE and the BIT group and so on. They're managing our minds through this whole coronavirus terror, you see, because it's a terror, it's a war of terror on the public. I've said it so many times since the beginning. But the media went into overdrive, and then you find out, sure enough, the media were given, and I'll put some of this up tonight, they were given an outline by this very group from the British government on how to use, to heighten anxiety amongst the public by giving them terrifying stories and so on, to try to make them all to conform to obedience by the experts. So they admit it now, which was obvious anyway. I don't need admissions when you can see it for yourself. That media, of course, was complicit. This terrible media, as I say, that had lost so much. Look for years now that they start charging money for folk to look into the newspapers and to see their opinion columns and things like that, because there are no real reporters now. They know how to put a story together. But like everybody else, they sit on their gluteus maximus and they basically get it from the internet, all the information, like everybody else. And they don't go on the spot. But they're just as complicit as they were before that, because newspapers were always on board with government policies, and every newspaper wanted to have prestige. Even the small local ones wanted prestige, and so they get in on the town councils and things like that, and they get little quips and off the cuff interviews and so on. And if you're not playing ball with politicians, for instance, eventually you're not allowed in to the meetings. So all the ones who are allowed in are compromised. They're on board and they have the little gestures and winks and all that. And they know how to play the game of deceiving the public. And eventually they actually think they're part of the ruling class that manages the public, because they manage your mind. And they manage your minds, you see. And they've always been doing, even when they'd had real reporters, they were on board with all the wars that came down the pike, basically, when it suited the elite in their own countries. To take over the resources of other nations and so on. I know that, I could go on about how Britain didn't recover really, but London recovered from World War II by continuing the military-industrial complex in Britain. They had nothing much left, really. It's at a mountain of debt, because they borrowed from the US banks all through the war. They were still paying off the loans from World War I. But what they did have at the end of World War II was manufacturing for weaponry and aircraft, and jet aircraft too. They got into the Commune and so on. And they started to realize that you could look at the oil regimes in the Middle East and they got awfully pally with them, especially Saudi Arabia and a few other ones. Other ones just deposed whoever was in and put their own people in for a little while, like they did in Iran. Then they were thrown out eventually. And they've never forgiven Iran for that. But those in London wanted oil, the corporations. And they used generally the military. And then the best thing to do is to start selling the weapons, you see. Still doing it today. And it's awfully lucrative, tremendously lucrative. When you see what, for instance, Saudi Arabia buys from England every year, or London. And I hate using the nations. If you realise when they talk about England's doing this and Britain's doing it, or Canada, it's not at all. It's a clique in your capitals and the cities that are in charge of it all on behalf of those who really own the countries. It's not the people. And sometimes they leave you a little bit more scrapings and breadcrumbs to keep the people happy. But at the same time, they resent even that at the very, very top. And they have their great futuristic views of where they're taking the world. I mentioned before the novel, it was called The Stonecutter, a story about medieval, early medieval really in a sense, where a stonemason would carry his son around. Very important, this idea of passing everything on to your son, the true apprentice, you see. And he would carry his little son on his back when he would travel to new towns, when they're building cathedrals or castles or whatever it had to be, or big mansions for the elite and wealthy across Europe. And you get into the story, and you find out that they have enemies, you see, at the lower levels of Masons, the stonemasons. And it refers to, of course, to the modern Freemasonry that takes they use the terminology of masonry and geometry, etc., and architecture, and of course the Old Testament, to demystify those at the bottom, and to eventually enlighten those who get the higher degree so they can be used for higher things and keep silent about it. But the book goes on about how they have Hugh de Montfort, I think it was, the same one who was let loose upon the Albigensians in France, or Alsace at the time. And the Albigensians were doing their own thing. They had their own religion, they had their own priesthood, and they rejected a lot of the Catholic Church at that time, you see. But they also had other groups in with them too. There was even Jewish rabbis that were noted in amongst them. Most of them were vegan, by the way, a very important thing. The Albigensians also talked about the evil of bringing children into the world, awfully important. But because of their different opposition to authority, the ruling authorities and the nobilities, they were eventually put to the sword. Not all of them died naturally. Not everybody always does get killed off in any purge, but that's what happened to them. But this is incorporated. The other bit was incorporated in the book. So this terrible Montfort was a terrible character, you see. And you get in the book, and it's really interesting and all the rest of it. And the dad's a really gruff guy, not the brightest fella. The son's much swifter. But his son is noticed by the other Masons around him. There's actually like an officer command all the way down to NCOs and all, just like Freemasonry in a sense. And they see the son has got these insights into situations, political as well. And they start to almost groom him. He's getting kind of groomed. And eventually they all meet at a big annual gathering on an island of all these different ranks of stonemasons. And you find out that they're all shocked eventually when de Montfort turns up himself, and they're all aghast in horror, because this is like the Antichrist to them, you see. But then they find, don't worry, no, calm down, he's one of us, you see. And then you realise that the group, with their very secretive, and again they're secretive in a sense, but their display of nature, the Green Man and so on. You'll see in all the different, even churches in Britain and temples and so on, representing nature and the man himself, the man who's part of the world and nature, etc. It's called occultic, but it's very understandable and easy to understand, really. So anyway, the whole idea was that if you don't plan the future will stagnate, the people will stagnate. And stagnation creates unrest and unease amongst the people who are stagnating. You found that in countries in Europe, and Britain was definitely one of them for a good period. After World War II, forget all the hype about the Beatles and stuff like that, this was amazing psychological warfare, as well as being awful lucrative for those involved in the culture industry, who were also changing culture. But the fact, for the average person, it was awful for them. The scarcity of money. You couldn't get bank loans back then unless you had something to put up as collateral. You couldn't even get a credit card in the UK at that time. But you're supposed to be happy for this fake, made-up package deals like the Beatles, and many others. That's how it was presented to the public. And they go on the stage, like Top of the Pops, every group that went on, and they'd mime. And you would notice that generally didn't have any leads going on the guitar, if you're observant at all. Or you would see that leads went nowhere. They just went to a dead end and taped on the floor. And these package groups were really modelled after the American system, where you had the family type things, the Jackson 5 and all that. And And the Cassidys as well. There's a whole bunch of them anyway, but they're like family things, all made for TV, and music was all written for them, and they're a package deal, etc. And that's how they did it in Britain too. It was the first time they'd really done that kind of thing for the teenage group in Britain. And they would throw movies out about the guys. You get the 4 guys running here, laughing here, and getting chased by women and running away from them, and yada yada. All very, very silly stuff. Big package thing. But for the most of the public, they didn't have the cash. As I said before, there were freezes on wages and freezes on everything really. But even on prices supposedly, but the prices kept going up anyway. And even energy was awfully expensive. A lot of folk in the working classes had meters in their homes. And you put, initially it was £1, I think it was, and you might get an hour or less than that of electricity if you're using a bulb or two, you know. And of course it would go up all the time. They keep resetting the meters. And but yeah, things you folk take for granted today were in dire straits back then. Terrible. But they gave you all this make-believe stuff for the youngsters to believe in, and the revolutionary thing behind it all too, especially with say the Bob Dylan stuff. Initially it was all revolutionary stuff along with John Baez, and then it didn't work so well, so they changed it to sex. You see, sex, and drugs. That was the next stage, because the other part wasn't doing too well, the old system. So revolution is a great way to foment it during stagnation times. Just like it is today. For those who haven't noticed the build-up to the COVID before that broke out, a feeling of stagnation. What we're getting all the time was wars, across same wars, 30 years in the Middle East, at least 30 years. And Afghanistan again, you know, and watching the US getting burned out with its debt burden, for instance. Except for the big corporations that are behind the wars and supplying it. It's very lucrative. And the companies that grab the oil, and Tony Blair kind of admitted a bit of that too. But as I say, there was a stagnation. It was like nothing else is happening. Things were getting more expensive. The money was becoming worth less and less after, especially after that last crash, 2007 and 8. So those who run the world, and getting back to this book, that's what it was about. It was well done, actually. As I say, they meet in an island, they find out that their arch enemy, who's the opposite, they think he's going to come to kill them all because they're kind of occultic groups, you know, they've all passwords and secrets and stuff. And then they find out, no, he's the nobility, but he's on our side. And then they meet the bishops of the Catholic churches and different ones like that, who are also in this particular group. So all sides that generally opposed each other for the rest of the year, or seemed to. It was all arranged to do so using a dialectical technique, you know. You want the change. You want to guide the world, your world, into the future so that you've planned. So they decide where they want to take it and how to take it there. And you must have conflicting parties. Again, the simplest technique is if there's only two, then it's the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. You've got the thesis, right? Here's the ruling system as it is. This is how you live. Here's some people who argue, we want a different system, so you oppose things and you get it going. And out of the arguments and the debates, you get, and sometimes wars, you get the synthesis, which is the goal you wanted in the first place. You've got to have opposing parties to get change going. So that's part of the technique of ruling the world, is by the elite people planning where they want to take the world, their world. They'll never do without. They'll never make the world equal for themselves, except that they're equally running it all on top, or owning it all on top. But they'll never jump into the same financial system as you're into. Believe you me. And so yeah, they all met on an island, and they actually groomed the young boy. You see, they call them visionaries. They wanted a visionary. The guy with insight, and it gave him a lot of power initially, but his ego gets carried away with his own ego eventually and screws something up royally, and he's demoted and banished to a little island off Scotland, I think it was, to live in a monastery is with a vow of silence. In other words, you can't tell anybody what you're up to, right, or what you've done in the past. You're part of the brotherhood. But it was interesting, the whole concept that's how you rule the world. You create the enemies, and yet they're not enemies at all. Only the general public think they're all enemies, and they'll believe it, and they'll even tell their children, oh, so-and-so, they hate us, or they're going to do this to us. Well, you don't realize the leaders are all on board for the same agenda, you see. And that's what we have today, isn't it? We have the crash in 2007, 2008. All these years, I've lost count of the talks I've given from not just the World Economic Forum, but the different departments of population control that have come out over many, many years. They're on the go before I was born too, talking about, there'd be too many people, and the baby boomers, people born after World War II would be called the baby boomers. Like they never had children before, apparently, yeah? And then they said that there'll be old folk eventually, those baby boomers will be old eventually, and that's going to be a crisis as well. They never told you why it would be a crisis, because I found out by studying intensely that they've had old folk down through history. I never knew that. Eh? So the baby boomers were going to get old, eh? And my God, what are you going to do with all these old folk? And they've told us in the last few years, they're more open about it. They've got their favourite psychologists coming out, and so-called philosophers, and the bioethics, of course, this new science, where they know what moral is, but you don't. You need an expert to explain it to you. The same scenario that you had with, and it's an awfully good little quip. I watched it again the other day. I've got it saved on a disc somewhere. It was The Meaning of Life by Monty Python crew, and opens up with John Cleese and one of the guys from Monty Python in a white coat is chapping on a door. Not a chapping is a knock, you see, it's a chapping on a door, and a woman opens it up. It's one of the other members of the team, and that's the address, the whole thing, and is your husband, and he mentions the name. That's him. Yes, he's through there, and they go through there and literally whip out his liver. You see, here get his liver, because he put it down that he was going to be a donor if anything happened to him or got ill or anything like that. And they didn't wait till he died. They just went and got his liver. And the whole scenario, and then they try to talk the wife into giving the liver as well. The end of it by making her realize how small she was in this massive universe where there's planets swirling around space and galaxies and so on at thousands of miles an hour, etc. And how small you are in all this great scheme of things. And she said, okay, and then you go to work and whip out the liver. And again, it's you understand this whole idea of bioethics is being promoted for years. And even when the Monty Python crew all met, I think it was at Oxford, it was one of the universities they met at, and they got that kind of stuff put in their faces there too, where the world would go and how it would be run, and experts would rule us all. Because Britain came out of World War II after opposing National Socialism. They came out as an international socialist country. I mean, communist, if you like. But communism is awfully good to those who rule it, because it means that people have to scrape at the bottom with their wages freezes and price freezes and all that, and the rationing of electricity and poor food. If you can afford the decent stuff at all, you can get access to it. But the elite love it. That's what I'm talking about. It's the same scenario, you see. We're run by the bioethicists. They keep telling us there's too many of you, like it's a crime. There's too many of you, right? And they just know it, and you should feel terrible about existing. And so they went to town by social engineering a whole generation. And I even mentioned that back in the 90s. I says, right now the children's books, because that was all the rage then, there were awfully good exposés on at the time of the grants that were given by our tax money. And the culture industries, they like to call it, from government. Every government's got a department of culture. Everyone where it's about is to upgrade the beliefs of the upcoming children, you see. And you get paid money. I still do, if you write children's books and incorporate all the new political correct things into it, And the child grows up thinking all these things are quite normal because it's in storybooks. And adults would tell you if it was bad, but they don't, because they themselves feel guilty if they say, maybe the child may upset them to find out the truth here. Well, all kinds of things are engineered into all these different stories and movies for children as well. And that's how you shape the future, through the culture industry, you see, and through politics, and through all the organized and well-funded and directed, and the leaders are all supplied to them. All these different groups that oppose each other, either in politics or the ones in the riots you'll get too, civil disobedience and stuff like that. And I caught onto that myself, as I said, many, many, many years ago, how that part was all run. And you'll find those who organize, who are the real organizers, are well looked after financially. They know what the score is. They know they're using everybody that follows. But they get the non-governmental organizations, they're all invited, the heads of them. I think I mentioned this last week. I mentioned it years when it actually happened, years ago, when the globalist meetings were on, with the big international global corporations with the governments all meeting in Canada and different countries. And there was massive demonstrations with the students who had legitimate beefs about the thing initially was anti-global, because they didn't want these massive corporations exploiting third world countries for the cheapest labor and getting immense profits because of the cheapness of labor, and then they get paid by your tax money to import it back into our countries. So we would buy this stuff there, and they would keep the prices at the same price as they were made in Britain or Europe or America or whatever. But the fact that it was a fraction of the cost, so it was massive profits for them, massive greed profits. Hasn't changed. And the politicians looked down. You actually saw them. They had camera crew up there from some TV station, and they allowed that quip out to the public, that little bit, where they looked down and says, well, who are they? What party, what groups are they? And they mentioned some of the names of these different groups that opposed them, the student groups and so on. And they says, well, why don't we just invite some of the leaders to come up here? And they did. And then they put those same leaders on salaries. And that's why they're very selective in what they're told what they protest. The leaders are all well paid on salaries, living high in the hog, really high in the hog, compared to a lot of the working class people. They're not working class, so it seems, and they get all the followers, and they get well trained, by the way. There's all kinds of government agencies that deal with training folk for subversion. That's what your own MI6 in Britain, and you've got CSIS in Canada, and many other organizations, and again, CIA is one of the experts at it now. And they literally are masters at how to create organizations to foment rebellion. I gave the talks on soft power, the creation of soft power, they call it, and how they used it across a good part of Europe. And Soros does it too, because they're all one big club. There are no enemies here, we understand that at the top. And that's why your CIA, your Mossad, your MI6, all the different groups at the very top are all on board with the same agenda. All of them. And you couldn't keep any of them out, could you? You'll get your own group will eventually be infiltrated, and they found that before World War II started, with many of the different organizations that existed then. And so you bring them all on board in a big pact, working together. And again, you play just like the adversaries, the fake adversaries that you had in that book, that's the Stonecutter. Yeah. And it's quite fascinating when you see that's how the world really is run. It's like John McCarr, reading some of his books as well. You get don't get wrapped up in the story, I don't. But what's interesting is that the little bits of techniques they'll show you on the way, you see. How everyone is still disposable, except the very ones at the top, the ones who don't go out in the field, so to speak, are more important. They're the ones who play the chess games with using thousands of people, sometimes millions, across the world. And that's how the world's really run. gone through this whole COVID thing. Oh, the world is going to fall apart and the sky is falling. But initially, they made sure that everybody saw. We all saw the little bits from China. And, horror stories came out of China. Horror stories. And there was no censorship on the West part about the horror stories. And there was no cry from the big tech companies about, that's false, and that's bad, it's not true information. False news. There was none of that, no. They made sure you got your hefty doses of terror, you see. And then, of course, the World Health Organization, and then Fauci too, declared that pandemic, and only had 100-odd cases outside of China at that time. That's impossible. You understand this? We changed the rules for this. They changed the rules on of how to define a pandemic. You didn't need numbers anymore, figures. Which is your first clue. Is a big con going on here. Massive con. Of course there is. Many things have come to light along the way too, but the fact is, the media were calling everybody else, fake news. Look what's happening in China, and you put the links on. There's these massive trucks going down the streets in Wuhan and blasting this mist out of them. They've got hundreds of feet into there, and guys carrying these blasters, the blaster stuff from backpacks and so on, like heavy mists and horror, my God, and Wuhan, and oh my God, there's a biolab not for this, a couple of miles away, yada yada yada. So we all got the picture. That was meant to be put across, and then of course, it literally. Sage in the group that Sage, there's different levels of Sage, understand, and some are associated yet. You still won't get the names of some of them yet, but with the names of Sage and one of the subgroups that is specializing in terror, the creation of terror on the public, and I've got the actual form they gave out to the media. All different media were giving them. The step-by-step thing of how they'd have to basically terrorize the public into compliance. And so the different levels of terrorization on the public, and to increase anxiety, they said, for those who were unwilling to comply with all the rules. So it's a nice way of we don't call it terrorizing, no, we call it increasing anxiety. It may lead to depression, maybe even suicides. But listen, it has to be done to make them comply. This is animal management. I hope you understand. This is Pavlovian here. And your own governments employ these agencies to terrorize you. This is not new, by the way. It's been done many times. They use it in warfare. Oh, you're all going to die unless you hate those folk that we're going to go to war with. And we want you to hate them so you will go to war with them. That's standard stuff. But again, here you have it. It's here in a socialized system now, a good atheized, socialized system with experts rule. And so in the new Soviet is in the West, you see. And this is their mantra, science rules, and all these psychologists and behaviorists and neuroscientists, they're all on board together with their hands out and filling up their massive pockets that they have in those white coats, you've noticed, eh? Because they fill out, the grants are getting thrown out like confetti to them, and these are your future multi-billionaires here, folks. Oh, give me an art. I could sit and write 10 studies a day of imaginary things quite easily. And give me another few million every other day, and I'll investigate these things further. I can keep churning the stuff, and that's what they do, folks. But the psychological teams are just weapons. These are weapons experts, weapons of the mind, you see. That's what they use on you. And they understand you and what makes you tick. And they understand how you'll react to scenarios if they present it in the proper way to make you react in absolute fear and terror and panic. And then they'll guide you where they want you to go. I mentioned this even in the 90s. That's what they do when the public are quite happy. because they're natural people, you see, quite happy to be, again, pretty stagnant sometimes in a field or two for grazing. If it's not too bad, and there's good trash getting churned out on television just to make you kind of fade out when you come back from work, if you've got a job, that is. And you can just fade out in front of the television set, watching trash, really. It's all trash, really. It's been trash for an awful long time. We just churned out trash, just like Orwell talks about in 1984, where machines would churn out the music too, maybe even the novels, the porno novels, maybe in the movie type things. That's what he was getting at. That it'd be so automated. That as long as the main message got out there, it didn't matter about the quality so much. And that's what TV was too. But it also updated you, as I say, with all the new PCs. I shouldn't think about that like that anymore. I should accept this new normal. And there's another new normal, and I'll accept that too. And then you get, again, more experts that would come out, and you sit and watch that trash you get all the time, buried in experts. Did you know, that blah, blah, blah. There's one I'll put up tonight. I thought it was a joke at first, but again, somebody's got their hand out. Maybe it is still a joke, because it is technically a joke, isn't it? Where literally they said that the strangers having sex during COVID should still wear masks. I thought, there you go, eh? Here's, aren't you, kind of eyes wide shut thing, very kinky. But whether it's real or not, it wouldn't surprise me, because there's all kinds of farces going on with the hands out, as government throws out trillions of your hard-earned cash that's going to devalue your currency forever and ever and ever to these parasites. They're all got their little confetti degrees from university on this, that and the other to be experts in rubbish, absolute tripe. And the prostitutes, basically. I have no time for these people at all. They're shallow, they're psychopathic, no doubt about it, but they have no guilt on what they're doing to the public, and reaping such incredible benefits of misery. Then they're psychopaths, no doubt about it. And they churn this tripe out. Constantly, just daily. But you don't realise, you've had that your whole life, I can remember years ago in Britain, they showed us some of the TV talk shows. To give us an example, this would have shown you how it was done in America with talk shows back in maybe the 70s, maybe even before that, but the 70s for sure, 80s. And Phil Donahue was one of the guys they showed you. But they showed you, and this is what was obvious too, when you saw the ending of one of Donahue's shows, the thing went on unrolled for 10 minutes of the names and organizations, professionals and psychologists, and that put all this thing together for that 1 hour show, maybe 40 minutes, really, 45 minutes once you got the ads out of the way. And what they could do was present something with then was the kind of shock value, but done with authority, and Donahue would always speak with command and authority. He knew what he was talking about. And one of them was women, about 4 women on stools, I think, or high chairs. And he says, this is some real professional women to discuss things. But they don't tell you that even then, they had such a great survey done on the public. They knew who was right wing, left wing, in the middle, progressive, meaning they're all for all kinds of new kind of ideas, sexually or whatever, yada yada yada. And so they knew, and so they would ask the right audience for each particular topic. That still goes on today for different things. So they had the right ones in, and he says, but these women, he said, as soon as they mentioned their names, they might not be liked by many townsfolk because they're women of the night. They're madams and prostitutes. And there was a big hush, which of course was expected. They gave them, everything was done so perfectly. Like they'll probably go now at this and that, and so they give you a pause for that. Everything's prearranged. The audience don't even know it themselves generally, most of them anyway. And so it starts off with that. That's years ago too, when there was still a bit of ideas of right and wrong, because prostitutes and all this kind of stuff can damage family units, which makes towns up and eventually communities up too, and families, which all know that can help destroy them. We know that now. It's been pretty successful. But they had the normal response back then. Oh my God, oh dear, oh. But within the 45 minutes to an hour, and the way it was presented, step by step, pre-managed, you see, it's all worked out and produced before it was produced, if you like. And all these experts and psychologists and psychiatrists working on their scripts with them, they actually had the women crying on behalf of these women, because they had such a hard life to get on, and they're earning money, and they're doing the community a service now, you see. And that's back then. And that's how slick it is done. You don't realize it until if you're in these talk shows, you look at the longest part of the talk show is when they unroll all the credits at the end, and all the different participants and organizations and agencies, and they all took part in it to make that 1 hour possible. Very important, you understand? Most folk don't even think of that. They really think it's all spontaneous. There's nothing that comes across TV that's spontaneous. TV is one of the most powerful tools that's ever been invented, and weapons. I think even, what's his name, the producer, the TV producer, or the movie producer, Spielberg mentioned the same thing. It's a great weapon, you know? One of the greatest tools and weapons. Others have said the same thing, of course, and Ordo and different off-the-cuff comments about radio at the time and the coming technologies that would be shown. Movies at that time, of course, they had that. It was tremendous tools and power for managed change. It doesn't mean it's a good change, because those in charge, tyrants, can use it so easily, which obviously they do. The things you take for granted, as I say, is astonishing. And why shouldn't you take things for granted? You'd be ultra paranoid and biting your nails and neurotic at everything if you were brought up with just a basic crash course as a child, a crash course, and how the system really works. You're meant to be naive. You're meant to take things at face value. And then you're a good citizen because you'll comply with everything you're told to comply with. That's awfully important to those who control societies. Now, when you have a massive experiment going on, which is also part of a complete change, it's meant to be a new world order, remember, a completely new way of living coming out of the COVID. And they talked about that nothing would ever be the same again. Told by Mr. Foxy, Foxy Fauci. A man who's so involved with this big, what can you say, well worked out agenda, along with Bill Gates. And they've got their fingers on all the pies that's profiting from it would seem to me. And it's not just guessing either. And with the complicity of all parties in all countries, and all agencies of government, remember. You're right back again to the island in the Stone Cutter, where they all meet there, all the different supposed opposite, the ones you really truly believe are arch enemies, are ready to kill each other. No, they're pals in a brotherhood as they manage the world and shape it through conflict and public arguments and even repression, even killing people of the peasantry and so on, to make changes happen. But it's all planned out ahead of time. Getting back, see, all sides are complicit at the very higher levels of government. They could never ever be always at loggerheads with each other. But when it's not efficient, don't forget their whole motto is efficiency. Technocracy, efficiency. You see? Where experts will run everything. The whole communist system was based on atheism, and science was the new religion. Science. And through science they'd conquer everything, but they'd also rule everything. And that was all kinds of social experts, again, and psychologists and behaviorists. They'd manage the population, and they'd have perfect peace when you're all trained into being zombies. You see? So it really took participation. And even during the Cold War, even as a child, I said, this thing is so fishy. The whole Cold War scenario, because I went to library, and we had good libraries in Scotland. And if you didn't have the right books, and they'd order it for you if you knew what you were looking for and what you wanted. But they had great reference libraries too. And they went through the whole, these books on the science of warfare, things like that. And they would go into the Cold War strategy, etc., etc. And you'd have all these specialists announcing that those with the most advanced technologies would win this Cold War, and any kind of war. In fact, that still goes true today. Even one of the top generals that's against Trump recently, I looked into the one that you know the one he is, who's turned against him. There's a bunch of them turned against him, but there's lots and lots and lots of generals, remember. They make it seem like they're all against him. But you forget too, a lot of them are also on the payroll of the military-industrial complex. There's an awful lot of rich multi-millionaire generals out there. And also belong to the Brotherhood too, of course. And the Brotherhood is part of the establishment. You see, it is the establishment at the very top. And there's low orders of it and higher orders of course. But you find, as I say, efficiency, for efficiency's sake, you see. Why would you always be at loggerheads with an enemy like Russia during the Cold War? And since science and the top scientists, they're always talking about, they'll steal our scientists, and occasionally you'd have that in the papers, oh my God, if this top scientist leaves Britain, we'll be left as defenseless, he'll work for the Russians, and vice versa, and so on. But what you find is that all through the Cold War, all different types of science would have its own meetings with the Soviet systems, annual, sometimes twice a year. So you had the physicists meeting twice a year, and you have the different ones for psychology again, because they're all involved in how to keep your populations placid and obedient, things like that. And other ones would deal with food supplies, agriculture, and they'd either meet at the United Nations or they'd meet in Russia. It was generally Russia they went to meet. It was interesting to me. And the British taxpayer would have to fund it. And I thought, well, why would you be so terrified of them defecting to the Soviet system? But at the same time, your top atomic scientists and biowarfare experts, all this kind of stuff. Why would you have them meeting their counterparts in Russia to share what's for advancement of science? No, these folk were all involved in weaponization of different things. Why would? But it was allowed, which told me this thing is, this is not as what they're telling us is obviously. Really, if the book said it, and they all said it, that was what they were all taught. Again, officers' colleges too would teach the military. Same thing, that science is going to, those with the most advanced science will win and dominate. But here's your best scientists every year going over to meet their counterparts in Russia. It made no sense at all. None at all. Until you realise, you're back to that book again, the Stonecutter. And that's what you do, because after all, since it's all based on efficiency, why wouldn't you have agreements with them? Because you all want the same things, don't you? Efficiency. And the Soviet system was to really push for the elimination of religion. And the West too took on that role more and more and more, again through TV and movies and so on. It pushed, and all the joking and the gesturing, nasty gestures towards religion, all got sunk through until the folk became atheized themselves and just fell away. And the Church of England was a joke, because it was so progressive in the lefty sense of the thing. There's nothing left to save, you see. And then when you end up having Archbishop of Canterbury, who's a Druid and a very high Freemason too, and belongs to different groups as well, apart from the Druids, then it's over and done with, Then you had mass defections of what was left back to the Catholic Church, others to the Eastern Orthodox Church, because they realized that the war that we're fighting against the communists in the East had destroyed what was left of their own system back home, with the complicity of their own governments, of course. But religion, really, in Britain, was tied to the crown. That's why it also went under, because in World War I, as an example, even before, but in World War I, with the crown and the king or the queen being the head of the Church of England, then obviously, how could you have all your ministers and priests blessing and telling the folk to be behind wars, which were antithetical to the peace and love and all the rest of it? It didn't work. And so with the shock of mass deaths in World War I and the mass depression, financial after it too, and then going into World War II, Britain didn't really improve because of the war. You see, war pulls you out of the depression, the financial depression. But Britain didn't, because it was on rationing, and tokens really were used for just as well as money during World War II. But once again, the church tried, it failed really, to promote the war in their churches, but after World War II, there's nothing left really to stand up for. They'd broken everything they stood for, and it faded away. It fell away. You see, sad really, because then you're in to the scientific system running your lives, and you believe in it. And you're taught to believe in it. There's science. You're humanists. There's their term for it too, a secular humanist. It has its own manifesto, and it is a religion as well. The man is a god, really, and the right gods, the right human gods, should rule over the rest of you. It's very Greek in a sense, isn't it? I always thought that when I was young. I thought, the Greek idea of gods, like a hierarchy of gods, and it's wonderful too how they're all based on kind of humans. They kind of look like humans, most of them, although they could change their form and shape shifters, etc. And the Greeks had fantastic stories. The children must have loved it even back then. But the Greeks would talk about again degrees of godhood, and the earth itself was the lowest form of existence. And because everyone was base and temporal and temporary for humans and animals and things, we didn't live that long back in those days, sort of thing. And you're at the mercy of the winds and the climate and all the rest of it too. And you're at the mercy of bad food supplies at times, and wars and famines. Things often brought on by people too. So it wasn't the greatest place to be. So you turn to the gods. And what was good about it too, I suppose, you see, as a primitive man, they weren't so primitive, actually, they're pretty intelligent, the Greeks, but they'd have different gods, which is like India. And by the way, they're well aware of India and Hinduism, etc. The Greeks studied all the different religions, but they knew that the public, as they're suffering, it would help to calm them to some extent, but give them hope in tough times, to pray to different gods for different functions. And that became awfully important, and even the church adopted that, and the Catholic Church adopted some of that too, with saints and so on. Different ones for special purposes, special problems. It's very human. It's a human thing, really, when you think about it, because there's times where nothing scientific is going to satisfy you. That old saying, the world is not enough, can be awfully true at times. If you're going through really terrible, horrible times in your life, and it's true, the world is not enough. There's no book out there or self-help book's going to help you. They churn these things out of machines too, I think, so fast, it's incredible. But there's a spiritual side to humans that some folk want more than others. They desire more. It's not a weakness, by the way. The total atheists will try to say it's a complete weakness, but it's not. It's a natural thing. And if you get experiences from it that are beneficial to you, then obviously there's nothing wrong with them, you know. But the Greeks, again, they knew the world was somehow bad, kind of like the Albigensians, later Albigensians. And so the god that was in charge of the world would be the lowest form, the demiurgos, a kind of a bully type god, kind of strict and all the rest of it. Very human in some ways. But there's other gods above them. That's how they kind of tried to work it out to be. And the Greeks also had all the different schools of thought. They call them schools. And only the wealthier classes got education. That's where the word school comes from. Scholar, for really leisure, you know. So their upper classes had more instruction in philosophies and debate life and the meaning of life, if you like, more than other people's, and at least wrote it down for future generations to see. So you understand that the enemy of basic human, real human feelings and needs, which cannot be supplied all the time by material goods, you know, are spiritual. And the one thing that the left and the humanists have hated, and the technocrats for all this time, is this remnant of either religion. They don't mind New Age spirituality, because the New Agers can be trained very quickly into sustainability through the food that they're eating, what not to eat, what they should eat, what they should avoid. Don't eat meat, be totally vegan, etc. Step by step is like a cult. They're brought into this way of thinking. And it's much easier today, by the way, with, say, the last 20 years of heavy indoctrination through what they call the New Age. I might put up a little, a YouTube link to a comedic sketch. And you got to laugh at yourself. I don't care who you are. If you're offended by things all the time, then you really have problems. You're not living. You got to get a life in some way. If you can't laugh at yourself, everybody should laugh at themselves sometimes. And this comedian, this is all skit on spirituality. How do spiritual people, I mean the New Age type, what you call the modern New Age, that came out of the old flower power era and got worse and worse and worse to know. It completely changed his character. How do they argue? You know, it's a little comedy sketch he does, and it's awfully well done. The guy's really good, and the team who helps put it together obviously is very professional in some ways. But that has happened. In the sketch, you'll see a lot of that going on. It's easier to train the ones who had the heavy brainwashing in school that the world's going to end tomorrow because of mismanagement of the planet. They don't know. They have no idea that all of this was written down years before they were born, of how to manage, just like the terror campaign for COVID managed by the governments and using their PSYOP teams and so on. This isn't conspiracy stuff. They published it. It's been published. I'll put it up tonight to show you how they would just terrify the public and apply extra anxiety on them, etc., etc., without letting them know that they were doing it. You got to understand this. Well, they've been doing it all through school for 20 odd years and more, maybe 30 years, preparing today. Since then, today's just a culmination of all that indoctrination from then, with the right generation, all stirred up, almost ready to go and kill anybody older than themselves. I'm not kidding about that. They tried. This is the communist technique. The communists are run by them too. There are no opposing sides. There are no, the leaders in all opposing sides, I mean the real high leaders, and they do have high leaders who manage this like a chessboard, are all in the same clubs, you know. Again, you must get change, you must create opposing sides. And say, oh, well, let's work this out and get a compromise, which means change, you see. Plan change. So, as I say, the one thing gets in the way is any other, like a set type religion with set values and rules. The New Age, as we said.